What is the most heartbreaking thing your parents ever did to you? What is the worst thing your parents ever did to you? My folks never really wanted kids. I was the only one they had, and from what my relatives have told me, I was a total accident. My childhood started out all right, but once I stopped being that little bundle of joy everyone cooed over, my parents seemed to lose interest. They were always working, running this business they built together. That company was their pride and joy, and I was just an afterthought. We had no close family nearby any relatives. We did have lived across the country, so growing up, I never really knew anyone outside of my house. For most of my childhood, I was practically raised by television and whatever teachers I had at school. By the time I hit my teenage years, birthdays were just another day. Instead of celebrating with me, my parents would just throw some money at me and tell me to buy myself something. Christmas? Same deal. Even back to school shopping was just me being handed cash and told to figure it out. After I turned 10, they stopped bothering with a Christmas tree altogether. I had to beg them to at least get a fake one so I could put it up myself every year. When I turned 16, I asked them if I could work at their business part-time. Figured it would be good experience and help me save for the future. They shut me down instantly, said they had no spots open. Might as well have just said they did not want me around. Then, when I turned 18, they sat me down and told me that since I was now legally an adult, I needed to start planning to move out. The problem was, I was still in high school, working a part-time job, and barely had enough money to do anything, let alone go to college. That did not matter to them. As soon as I graduated, they handed me an eviction notice 30 days to get out. No help, no guidance. I had to call a buddy's dad who had a truck just to move my stuff. I found a tiny, overpriced apartment and started working retail, but I had no clue how to manage my money. A few months in, my boss who had it out for me from the start found any excuse to write me up and got me fired. With no steady income and no savings, I lost my place fast. I swallowed my pride, went back to my parents, and begged them to let me stay just until I could get back on my feet. They shut the door in my face. I had nowhere to go. Ended up sleeping in a tent in somebody's backyard in the dead of winter. My friends? They were all off at college, starting their new lives, while I was stuck taking whatever work I could to survive. The only break I got was when a neighbor of my parents found out about my situation and offered me a place to stay for a little while. She also pushed me to track down my extended family, something my parents clearly did not want me to do. They resisted at first, but after enough pressure, they finally gave me a list of phone numbers, then told me never to bother them again. That is how I got in touch with my grandparents on my dad's side. They were shocked to hear from me, mostly because they had not seen me since I was a baby. When they found out what had happened, they wasted no time. They bought me a plane ticket and told me to come live with them. My parents did not even bother to say goodbye when I left. My grandparents were furious with my parents and ended up cutting them out of their wills. I later heard that my parents were not happy about that, but I figured it did not matter. They had plenty of money and did not need anything from my grandparents. Or at least, that is what I thought. After a year with my grandparents, I managed to save up enough for community college. I got an associate degree, landed a decent job, and eventually, my grandparents made me an offer. They wanted to retire to Arizona, but instead of selling their house to a stranger, they sold it to me at a fraction of its value. I was thrilled. It was a fresh start, and in just a few years, I would own my own home outright. My job required me to travel every now and then, meaning I would be away from home for weeks at a time. Late in 2020, I came back after a 2-week trip and noticed a white van in my driveway. At first, I thought about calling the police, but then I saw the company logo on the side. It was my parents' old business. My stomach dropped. I stepped inside and, sure enough, there they were, acting like they belonged there, greeting me like we were old friends. I told them to get the hell out, but they refused. Said it was still Grandma and Grandpa's house. I shot back that they had sold it to me when they retired, and that if they had actually been a part of my life, they would have known that. My dad puffed up his chest and tried to argue that since it had once belonged to his parents, he still had some kind of claim to it. I was not having it. I locked myself in my bedroom and called the cops. When the police arrived, my parents pulled a fast one. They told the officers they had been staying there long enough to claim residency. Total lie. But I had no cameras to prove otherwise, and my neighbors did not either. It became my word against theirs. Then they went even further. They told the cops we had a verbal rental agreement and that I was trying to illegally evict them. My mom even threw on the waterworks for sympathy. The police told me it was a civil matter and that I needed to go through the court system. This was during the pandemic, so that meant delays. Meanwhile, my parents were living in my house rent-free, shoving it in my face. From what I was able to piece together, their business had gone under, and they had sold off almost everything just to stay afloat. All they had left was that van and a few belongings, so they figured they could just crash at my place indefinitely. They both got new jobs, my dad as a delivery driver, my mom as a sales associate, but they still refused to pay rent. Instead, they handed me a $100 bill each month, acting like I should be grateful. Whenever I tried to talk about actual rent, they shut me down. Said I owed it to them for taking up 18 years of their lives. They even had the audacity to say that I should be thankful they were not demanding repayment for raising me. When I pushed back, they threatened to stop paying for utilities altogether. Every time I tried to bring up paying proper rent, they would shoot me down, saying I owed them a place to stay since I had taken 18 years of their lives. They even had the audacity to tell me I should be grateful they were not asking me to reimburse them for raising me. When I pushed back, they went straight to threats, said if I did not drop it, they would stop pitching in for utilities altogether. I had just about reached my breaking point. I picked up the phone and called my grandparents, laid everything out for them, and let them know what was happening. They were furious. My grandpa got on the phone with my parents, but even after that conversation, my parents refused to budge. They kept saying they had every right to stay. My grandpa sighed and told me he regretted selling me the house, because if they had kept it, my parents never would have pulled this stunt. I told him not to worry, had already started the eviction process. My parents knew their days were numbered, and I made sure to say it loud enough for them to hear. They just stared at me in silence. My dad was out of the house most of the time, driving a delivery truck 6 days a week, a job I knew he absolutely hated. My mom, on the other hand, spent all her time trying to take over my home. She started demanding I let her rearrange my furniture, acting like she owned the place. Then she tried to claim the master bedroom, saying that as my parents, they deserved better accommodations. I shut both ideas down immediately. I made it clear that they deserved nothing and that they had no right to act like I owed them anything. I did not ask to be born, and it was their job to raise me. That was not some favor they did for me, it was their responsibility. I knew exactly what they were doing. They were trying to establish control, trying to make themselves seem permanent so I would feel too guilty to throw them out. I let my mother know she was not fooling me, and her time in my house was running out. Then, after 4 exhausting months, well into 2021, I finally got them in front of a judge. The only reason we even had to go to court was because they fought the eviction, trying to manipulate me into dropping it. They pulled every trick in the book, bringing up the fact that the house had once belonged to my grandparents, and even trying to use those pitiful $100 payments as proof of a rental agreement. But they never had anything in writing, and they were not dumb enough to forge one that would have been fraud. In the end, the judge ruled that they had absolutely no claim to my home and gave them 30 days to get out. After court, they confronted me, putting on their best act of disappointment. They actually had the nerve to say they were ashamed of me for kicking out my own flesh and blood. I laughed right in their faces, called them hypocrites. They had thrown me out without a second thought, left me to fend for myself, and never once cared if I lived or died. Now they wanted to act like family mattered. They were nothing to me. They had never been real parents. They only knew how to take. I looked them in the eye and called them exactly what they were: selfish, lying, broke narcissists. Then I told them to start packing because I was not playing games. They knew I would not hesitate to call the cops the second that deadline hit. My dad looked like he was about to explode, but my mom grabbed his shoulder, shaking her head. He just sneered and turned away. I kept laughing. They dragged things out as long as they possibly could. That last month was nothing but a mix of them either guilt-tripping me or straight up ignoring me. I did not care. I put up a big calendar in the living room and marked off each passing day in red ink, just so they could see how close their time was running out. The day they had to be out, that one was circled in bright red. The 2nd of March. I will never forget it. They waited until the last possible second before they finally left. The most ridiculous part? They were so convinced they could manipulate me into letting them stay that they never even looked for an apartment until after the eviction went through. My mother spent weeks scrambling to find something, and in the end, they had to settle for a tiny, rundown studio apartment in the next city over. The irony of it all? That was exactly what I had been forced to do when I was 18. I ended up driving my mom over to see the place once. It was a dump. The walls were a sickly shade of green, the carpet looked like it had been there for decades, and the only window had a glorious view of a brick wall. No dishwasher. The smallest stove I had ever seen. The toilet looked like it belonged in a gas station. And to top it all off, the walls were paper thin. While we were standing there, we could hear two neighbors screaming at each other like they were in the same room with us. The whole time, my mother kept giving me these pitiful looks, hoping I would feel bad for them. She kept dropping little hints, trying to make me regret forcing them into such a place. I acted like I did not notice a damn thing, and eventually, she gave up. They signed the lease right away and spent the weekend moving what little they had into the apartment. Then they decided they were entitled to more. They demanded the queen-size bed, the dresser, and the flat-screen television from my guest room. I told them to take it all. I did not want anything in my house that reminded me of them after they had spent 5 months squatting in that space. They stared at me like I was treating them like some kind of disease, but they did not ask for anything else. The moment they were officially gone, I got to work changing the locks on every single door. They had no reason to ever step foot in my house again. When they finished moving and were getting into their van, they just sat there, watching me as I replaced the front door lock. They did not say a word. I did not say a word. I did not even look at them. They sat there for a while, then finally drove off. The second they were out of my life, I let out a breath I felt like I had been holding for years. I thought that was it. They had gotten what they deserved, and now I could move on. But life has a twisted sense of humor. A few months ago, my grandparents got a call from them. My parents were bragging full of themselves talking about how they had started a new business just like their old one. And guess what? It was right here in my state. I looked it up out of curiosity, and sure enough, it was doing well. Plenty of good reviews. Looked like they were right back to where they used to be before everything fell apart. I would be lying if I said I was not bitter. They put me through hell, left me homeless, took over my house, treated me like dirt, and now they were back to sipping wine and playing business moguls like none of it ever happened. If karma is real, it is moving way too damn slow.